Okay, I'm going to finish up this biblical Genesis series and go through the last verses that I'm interested in scripting in Grasshopper for Rhino, and this is the rendering that I end up with in the end that I've actually um, thought visualized this text for me. And so we're going to jump right back in. We're going to actually go into just a few lines before this and show this simple script once again. It's a geometry line script that's been scripted from here. I've begun by, well, I haven't formalized this yet. Uh, Straighten this out, maybe group that as the final bakeable forms. We'll see if that's actually what I want. I'm going to do a cleanup. Sorry, I didn't mean to bake them. I meant to group them. And in doing so, obviously I baked real geometry into Rhino, and I don't want that. So we'll take a look at this in this animation tool. I'll run while I kind of read the text. That seems to be a nice way to begin the day, I guess. And I'll make it a little larger so we can see what happens. Let's animate it. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." Excuse me. Nobody sneezing there. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kinds. And God saw that it was good. The way I brought this text in, I'm just going to show for a second here. As you can see that I didn't for some reason it didn't read as a split line there, and if I do that, it should bring the text down. That's it. What I've ended up doing is building different geometries according to their kind, symbolizing that. I then worked, and I'm going to have to make this a little bigger for my eyesight, worked on different plane orientations. And a way to clean these up very quickly is bring them down like this. You can space them at the same distance. You can move them all at once. Like I said, the lines don't really work at this. The spaghetti of lines doesn't really matter at this point. I brought in all my points just so I could visualize them. I'll square those up, space them, and bring them in as well. And this way I can shorten my code. I did a dispatch on these. I did a dispatch which chooses a list of information, has a dispatch pattern, and I'm interested in what my dispatch pattern is, which I can change. A dispatch pattern that I brought into this list to put it into A and B groups. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I have a plane orientation on the XY. Obviously, that can change very quickly by going into, you can double click and just hit another plane orientation, let's say XZ, and you could always make your own vector to change the plane. But you can see by just hitting a very interesting tool, Control Shift, I'm able to pull out all these and pop them in here, and now I've oriented all of those things on different orientation vertical. So I'm just going to hit back. Actually, I'll show you that again. Control Shift. You can pull this out, plug it back in there, and then it flattens all those forms again. Not really that important, but just a little tip. There's a number slider here that I'll end up using, and what does it do? It works the radius of all of those objects. So at this point, I like to pull back my number sliders so they're actually useful, and sometimes I label them so it's the size of the geometries. I'm not going to do that right now. I do have another dispatch that goes into these two dispatches, and I have a tendency to like to do this. And this panel tool is great for inputting data. So I can go in here, and of course a Boolean, for those that have coded, understand that 0 is false, 1 is true. So you can just sit here and type 1, 1, false, 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 true, and it will repeat, and I'll do a false, and then it will just repeat that pattern. We'll do a true, and we'll see what that pattern does. And you see it changes all the geometry within there. If that doesn't make sense, then I'd say you have an interest in going into basic Python programming and see where that takes you. Not as a joke. I mean, it's something that you can actually start to wrap your head around, variables, and obviously conditionals, and certainly getting into data and understanding booleans and integers and floats and all these wonderful things and strings of data. That all applies to this scripting, this node scripting. And things get complex quickly, but it will take you time to focus on what you want to learn from here. There's a lot of logic, math, and algorithms associated with this. I basically made a square and I put a domain onto it in the X and Y axis, and I had control over that in negative and positive directions, so I can actually change the size of this overall square of what I want up to 100. And once again, I'm going to bring my number slider back. I'm going to bring my number slider in. This is my animate number slider. And I have a seed, which is interesting because seeds are a way of controlling, unlike the code block system of random generation in Tinkercad, which I started with in the earlier video series. I can actually know that every time I set it at 25, it goes back to this pattern. Meanwhile, I have as many patterns as I want to type in here as a number slider. So that said, that's a lot of information in 5 minutes. That's not the script I want to talk about. That's the one prior to our final one. And I think I will apply that to the last script, and I am going to just jump right into that one. I'll probably end up putting these, if anybody requested these scripts, on GitHub. I'm not so eager to hide them. This script should be somewhat familiar, and you'll remember that from a past image, and this is the one I culminated the final thing into. I'll clean the script up a little bit. We'll go into it for the last 5 minutes, but then again, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the seas, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over all creeping things that creeps upon the earth. I'll check my grammar. One thing about this scribble tool is it doesn't have a spell check on it or grammar text, so I'm kind of just writing it in here as reference. I should probably rewrite it. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And it was so. And God was everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a sixth day. And of course, this one I'm not going to run as an animation because I ran into problems later on that as I started to change this data, because it influences the surface edit, I believe, that's underneath it. If I still have my surface on it, I believe I do. I'm not going to mess with it. I kind of want to, but I'm going to play with my graph mapper and see what happens. Obviously, I changed the entire geometry of what's happening by playing with this little bit of graph function. Actually, I really like that one that was there, but it's a slow script. And this would be a great example of me to go into the display tool, go down the canvas widgets, and put the profiler on. I believe it's on, and there you'll see, once again, I'm having trouble just with my windows recognizing if I have it on or not. There you see it. 255 milliseconds for that to run, 181 milliseconds for the pipe to run. So that gives you a sense of how slow this code is. It's not, like I said, it's not a tutorial. It's a creative, curious kind of way of thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just changing the size of that domain as it plays. Actually, I like that kind of form. It's pretty simple, but it doesn't really do anything too spectacular and make it undulate in any way. I'll pull it up to its full size. Why not? It's just not interesting on the even number 100. I'll leave it as 98. Oh, 91's not so interesting. And that's where you're starting to play with geometry by your understanding of math. And because it's a slow script, I keep missing it. Let's go back in and clean up the code fairly quickly. I have put all my final geometries in my pipe. I can put on my profiler to see what I'm dealing with. Not my profiler, put on my view node selected. So there's your cylinders, there's your spheres, there's your rings, spheres, cones, cylinders, and cubes. And then I make a boundary representation for the base. And this is where you might want to actually play around by just viewing that and change your script on what the base is. And that was kind of lofting things to form pools. We're at 9 minutes, so I don't know if I'm going to have time to clean this up. I can see things are somewhat out of order. You can see that I dragged this one after grouping it, that the script runs and comes back on itself. That's not good practice. So if I was to put this node in here and use that as data to then feed this, technically I probably should ungroup this form. I'm going to ungroup this one. Group, and I'm going to ungroup it. I'd probably have to click out here, ungroup the whole thing, in a sense that then I can grab these geometries just to be, I look to this when students are working because I do want to make sure they make good scripts. So the script really runs left to right, And then what happens is I do want to turn this into a baked item. So it's a good practice to come down here, grab a geometry, pull that geometry in, because you're going to want to bake it as that instance. And at this point, I can group them, I can frame them, I can space them, and I know those are all my baked geometries. That done, I can start to, you can see I did the same by bringing this in before I cap the holes on the top of the cylinders, otherwise they wouldn't be closed forms. I've worked with some move shapes. I have my plane here. I have a domain that controls this box. I work it in a negative and positive direction. Pretty interesting. That's not going to come ahead. I've got my dispatch tool that I like so much. Dispatch here that I like. I like dispatching to dispatches. It's probably not the most efficient coding system, but I enjoy it. I've got some number sliders that are playing off a radius. I have one that's playing off of another radius. And if you end up having things like this, you could have this be. You can go into here and use this one number slider through multiplication. I'll show you. You can right click here and go to expression. You can make an expression that takes the data from one number slider and does some type of functional manipulation to that. So the one slider affects everything. Like if I put this in as x divided by 12 and hit enter, then that has an expression associated with it. And this will get you thinking of using function nodes. And if I plug that one into here, it'll override this one. The same script's running with that. And this number slider now affects both this geometry, and I'll hit shift and select that one. You can see that that geometry affects both of those things, the rings and the spheres associated with it. So that can be fairly interesting to do that. I'm not going to change my script because I like my script. I'm going to hit Control Z and bring it back to where it was, and take that function off. The reason I show that, when you go into maths, you may find you end up start bringing in some pretty incredible tools that are in the maths, and they do say when you can start thinking about these things. Obviously, if you can program in C#, if you can program in Python or VBScript for RhinoScript, that's a much more complex area I'm going to go to later. But just start playing with the idea of right-clicking and playing with the expression nodes that are in these nodes independently. All right, we're pushing it at 2 minutes. You can see here I'm playing with dividing the points again, projecting the lines. I'm keeping it left to right, so all this data kind of helps the other one. I've said from the start, and you can see there's a actual graph on here, which I'd have to show you later why that has an effect. I'm not going to get into data trees and letting you understand grafting and flattening. I'm leaving that up to more basic tutorials that I would require you to do some hours on tutorials to find. And this script is getting a little too big that I may have to slow it down. But like I said, this was a culmination. I have said time and again that go to your points and concentrate on your script prior to needing the points. As I clean this up, you can see the script's pretty nasty and hanging all over the place. I've got some, I think of the graph matter as a means of control. So in doing so, I'm going to grab all my lovely number sliders, bring them in here, and start to consider this domain actually comes back here. This domain goes back on this range. Sorry, that's the domain for that range. And then my number sliders have an influence back beyond. That's my bifocal tool. And I'm watching the time at 13. I'm bringing my sliders back. What other sliders have I negated to bring back to play with? These two. I'm going to bring those back. I like the interface of this whole program. I'm going to bring my bifocals up here. And I am going to bring up my sliders. And I actually like this as a tool, but I'll just have to remember to move ahead to play with that. Let's take off this so we can actually see the whole thing and what's been created. We can play off of taking all of these number sliders, straighten them up, bring them in a certain difference. We can name them as to what they do. I'm just going to play a little bit with my curve and see what I do to my geometry in there. I've made another piece of geometry that I can go in and start to render my pipes. I can bake those as a group on one layer. Boom. I'm going to go into shaded so we can see what that is. Actually, I might go into render so you can see the colors as they come out. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to bake my second set of geometries as a group. And there they are, the spheres. I'm going to take my third set and bake that in as a group. Ooh, we're pushing it. I'm going to have to wrap it up. You're going to have to get a feel for it. And we end up with something that actually is looking like this. thank you very much for watching. That was kind of cramped. Tried to squeeze the end in, but we're done the biblical series. Thank you very much.